Well, I hope it's always difficult when you draw the lucky straw straight after lunch on the last day of Congress. So I'll be as brief as I possibly can, because I know everybody is getting pretty tired by the end of the Congress. But thank you very much for attending. I just want to talk about why benchmarking projects fail. I first became involved in benchmarking while I was working at a private company, PEC. We manufactured a whole bunch of different products, and mainly they were sold throughout New Zealand and Australia. And we realised at that stage, and this is going back probably 15, 20 years ago, that we couldn't actually build a sustainable manufacturing business here in New Zealand unless we actually transformed our business and changed it into something quite significantly different. And we didn't know it at the time, what we now call today benchmarking. But what we actually did was we did what comes naturally to us. We actually went out and we sought out where best practice was. And we actually got our, what we now know as benchmarking partners, that really assisted our organisation to actually make the transformation that we did. And it actually only took us 5 short years, really, to transform our business from being a manufacturer here locally in Australia and New Zealand to become a significant force to be reckoned with in a couple of niche products, providing solutions essentially on an international stage. It was really quite an extraordinary and quick transformation. We couldn't have actually achieved that transformation if it wasn't for the fact that we had relied heavily on our benchmarking partners. These were people who really, they had already trodden the path that we needed to tread. And without those people, we would have made a lot more mistakes and probably taken a lot more time than what we actually took to get to where we went. There was a study that was done of Fortune 500 companies some time back, and it found that the average payback was something around $76 million US on their successful benchmarking projects, just 12 months down the track. The interesting thing about that was some of those companies, though, exceeded the average, of course, by 3 or 4 times. So extraordinary paybacks can come out of benchmarking projects, best practice benchmarking projects. We found in our business that while we planned things quite carefully, that often some strange surprises actually did turn up. We found some of those surprises actually led to some really great innovations in our business as well. Hence the comment here from Robbie Burns' poem, To a Mouse. I guess we heard about Mice and Men from John Steinbeck back in 1937, wrote a novel about it, really popularised it. But Robbie Burns in his poem To a Mouse, which dates from 1786, tells of how he, while ploughing a field, upturned a mouse's nest. So the poem is actually an apology to the mouse, which I find is quite interesting. It reminds us that quite often we find that despite all our best planning and where we think our business is failing or where we think that we need to make improvements, quite often when we embark on these days and we undertake these organisational change projects, unexpected things happen and we don't always succeed at what we plan to start out to do. There was one study that the Centre of Organisational Excellence Research made available to me. And they found in this study 28% of the companies achieved $10,000 US or less in terms of return on that investment for benchmarking projects. So what that means is the return is far less than the actual cost of running the benchmarking project. We found in our own exercises that a number of our projects, we put an awful lot of effort in and they cost us a lot of money, but they actually failed. They failed to deliver what we expected from those. And I became quite intrigued with this to try to figure out why. Why is it that some projects actually do go ahead really well and you do get the return that you're expecting from projects? And I looked at those ones that had failed for us. And that's really been the subject of my paper, and that's what I want to just draw on. The full paper, and I presume you'll get a copy of it in due course. We haven't got very much time today, so I'll just cover a few of these, what I call failures, that I have found in the time that I've actually got available. It's quite common in organisations when you try something new like benchmarking, and you're relatively new to it, to think that it's a good idea to apply it to a low-risk part of the business, just in case it actually fails to deliver. The problem with this is quite often it means that such projects are not viewed as necessarily the most important parts of the organisation that actually need to be changed. Also, they're less likely to get the support that you need from management to make sure that they'll actually be successful. And of course, without getting those returns, management will often view, particularly if it's your first benchmarking project, as something that the whole approach to benchmarking looks like it's not going to actually deliver. So it's really, really important that you actually choose a benchmarking project that's very well aligned with the organisation's strategy. It's got to be something of strategic importance. It's got to actually transform the organisation. If it's not a really big ticket item, then it's unlikely that it's actually going to achieve the kinds of returns often that management will actually need. Today, organisations are stretched so much so that all effort must be towards achieving those goals in their overall strategy. So anything else, as we've heard from lots of people from the lean proponents, anything else is waste. So you don't have time to actually trial a process to actually make it work. You've actually got to make it work right straight out of the box. So it's better to begin a project which is it's better not to start a project which is of little importance to your organisation. You're not going to want to fail to achieve a breakthrough in your organisation, so you must always align your benchmarking projects with your organisational strategy. That's really what I'm calling one of the key failures. It's one of the ones that we found, this whole alignment with strategy is one of the key ones that we found in a lot of our projects at PEC. One of my clients was starting their first benchmarking project, and I was working through scoping the project with them. We discovered that there were at least 5 other initiatives that were all trying to be undertaken that would have some impact on the same project area that they were trying to achieve with the benchmarking project. We actually looked more closely than that, and we found one of the initiatives in particular was so interrelated with what this benchmarking project was involved with that it's very likely the project would not have been successful at all. We essentially had 2 projects fighting over the same sorts of resources, trying to involve the same sorts of people, and have slightly different outcomes. But they were essentially trying to achieve the same sort of thing. It's a common track that leaders tend to commission projects without even checking to see what the current initiatives are that are underway. In my experience, this is a real pitfall of benchmarking. So, in some instances, you can also find, as I've found, that 2 projects actually have conflicting outcomes. They can't both be right, and they're both going to stretch the organisation and take the organisation into 2 different directions, so it's not helpful at all. So it's very important to look at the current initiatives that are underway as you're setting up the benchmarking project. Make sure there are not conflicting outcomes, either with the strategy or with the current initiatives that are underway. And in some instances, you might find that it's actually possible to make a change to one of the existing initiatives rather than to start a whole new benchmarking project. So you need to always consider other initiatives that are underway or planned. So avoid this particular failure I call not considering other initiatives. I see all too often managers commissioning a project but failing to commit the resources. We don't just get this in projects, but we also get it, of course, in benchmarking projects as well. Having an effective sponsor for any organisational change is critical to the success of any project. Benchmarking projects are absolutely no different. Without a sponsor, you don't have a senior leader who's actually accountable for the delivery. You don't have a project manager, your project manager has no one to turn to secure the necessary resource that's needed to actually complete the project. And if you've ever been a project manager in these sorts of projects, it can be incredibly lonely and very, very frustrating. And of course, in these difficult times, companies are always trying to cut costs to the bare minimum. So often it means that resources are stretched, not only on this project, but also across other initiatives that the organisations are undertaking. So it often means that the resources that you might have secured on one day on your benchmarking project are tomorrow diverted onto some rather more important business initiative. And this is where the sponsor is absolutely essential. They're needed to consistently ensure that the project is adequately resourced, but recognising the importance of where this particular benchmarking project fits within the other organisations' initiatives. Make sure you've got a good, effective sponsor for your benchmarking project. So avoid the failure of lack of sponsorship. A very common failure is to not involve staff in the project, particularly those that are going to be most affected by the change that you're about to institute in the organisation. I worked once with a manufacturer where the process owner was involved in redesigning an assembly process. He supervised the assembly staff, so he was responsible for those people. He was also the most experienced person in that particular area of the factory. When it came to pilot the actual new process, it became blindingly obvious that the whole process wasn't going to work properly, despite the fact that it should have, on paper at least, saved cost and a lot of time. The assemblers who were on the line were very, very quick to point out where the process was wrong and what should have been changed to save cost. The process owner then sat down at the end of that exercise, that pilot exercise, he sat down with all of the assemblers and then they redesigned the process to how it should have been designed in the first place. They also managed to strip out 8% of the manufacturing cost. And the last thing that happened was the process owner then apologised to his people for not involving in the redesign first. I've seen many a project fail because the project team had not thought to engage with the staff who were actually involved in using the process. Generally, they're the people who know best what the job is, how time can be saved, and how costs can be stripped out. Using supervisors and managers is not necessarily going to provide you with the detailed information that you need about the process so that you can actually do that. All that's needed is somebody to come and ask the actual staff carrying out the job, how can we actually improve this process? It staggers me still how many businesses still don't ask these questions. I'm often also asked, how do I get my staff more engaged in the business? The answer is pretty simple. No one likes to be told how they're going to do a job. Everyone has an opinion and likes to be asked. Always involve staff who are going to be the most affected by the change. This is no different here. Otherwise, you'll likely meet staff resistance. One of my early lessons in benchmarking was a site visit. When I was comparing our process with those from the benchmarking partners, I realised that we hadn't identified some of the key measures and were lacking results in a few areas. Our benchmarking partner knew how each step of their process performed. Our analysis only went down to the sub-process level and never went down to the actual individual step level. Because we had no idea at the activity level, we couldn't make meaningful comparisons. We also didn't know some of the capability of our own process because we hadn't gone down to the same sort of level. So they'd gone to a lot more effort than we had in preparation for our visit. I found it very embarrassing. We really hadn't prepared well enough. Always make sure that you understand your own process, that it's been well documented, measures you've got clearly defined right down to the individual activity level, and verify your current results along with trends in any performance benchmarks where you can. Always remember that benchmarking is sharing with others. You can't share if you haven't been well prepared beforehand. This is failure to document your own process. Times are tough, and it's important to strip out as much time and cost in your processes as you can. Particularly, we need to focus on processes that have the highest transaction rate or involve a significant amount of staff time. This effort generally leads to cost savings, in many cases very, very significant ones. However, this preoccupation with costs often means we can lose sight of the actual customer and the effect of that on our customer. We need to consider how the processes add value to your customers. You must think very carefully about what those costs are. And if you're saving costs, will there be an adverse effect or impact on the customer? It doesn't take too much to upset customers and to receive a complaint. So although you may save cost by cutting face time with customers, you might also find that that's your only point of difference with that particular customer. And you find they walk simply as a result of the fact that you were trying to save a few dollars. Never lose sight of the customer or what they value from your process. If you don't understand what they value from your process, then you've got more work to do. And also the knowledge that you gain from being in contact with them is something that's valuable information. Make sure your benchmark team have a good understanding of the customer and what they value right from the very earliest stage of the benchmarking project. This is failure of the customer. When preparing to share your process with your benchmarking partner, it's also important to agree up front the information and how it will be used and safeguarded once it's shared. Because a lot of the information that you want to share with your benchmarking partner can be part of your institutional knowledge, and it's confidential, and you need to be careful to make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. It may be part of your competitive advantage. There's nothing more frustrating than to find information that you've shared in confidence, appearing, for example, on the front page of the newspaper. So you need to be confident that there's going to be no surprises before you sit down with your benchmarking partner. It's too late once the information is out there. Without an agreed code of ethics, you'll find it difficult to partner with large organisations, particularly those that are experienced at benchmarking. Many of these will have mature processes that you want to be benchmarking with, but you're not going to be able to engage with them unless you agree a code of ethics up front. Code of ethics has as part of it, you will share how that information will be kept, how it will be used. And it's a good idea to engage with your benchmarking partners and get that agreed up front before you start sharing information. This is failing to agree to code of ethics. I've seen many teams quickly dismiss some ideal benchmarking partners simply because they live overseas. Don't dismiss overseas-based organisations. You should not assume that a site visit is essential. With today's modern communications, it's possible to benchmark anywhere. It's not always necessary to travel to meet up. It's so very costly in both time and dollar terms, and you're trying to stretch those as far as you possibly can. Often very cost-effective virtual site visits can be conducted using video conferencing and Skype and VoIP services. Check first to see whether a site visit's even needed. Often an exchange of documents and one or more teleconferencing sessions is quite sufficient, all achievable without leaving your office. This is failing to assume a site visit's needed. Probably one of the most challenging parts of a benchmarking project occurs when you've completed investigating what needs to be changed. And now you need approval from management to implement the actual changes. Often management will downsize the changes proposed in order to save costs or minimise the risk of something going wrong. Or they may even refuse to give permission for implementation. So despite all the hard work that the team's actually done to this point, you're not going to realise that return unless you can get into implement things. So projects need to have frequent involvement in communications with senior leaders throughout the project. And that's really to make sure that there will be no surprises for management. Managers hate surprises. So keep them informed. Keep the communications freely flowing throughout the project. Keep them so that the project findings will be clearly understood and more likely to be accepted as the breakthrough improvements that you envisage, so that they actually can be made. This failure is not accepting findings. One of the most common failings is to copy what your partner does. It's easy to assume that because we adopt a partner's process, that we should enjoy the same levels of performance as our partner does. A good example today is a lot of organisations who are adopting Lean, Toyota's production system, although I've learned the last few days that they don't call it that anymore. These organisations will try to follow in Toyota's footsteps simply because Toyota's been incredibly successful at developing those, what I would describe as the standard quality tools, and applying them in a setting to build motor cars. So on the surface, this may seem like a good idea. Often we want instant results when it took Toyota decades to develop what they now see as their TPS. It's also unreasonable to assume that you'll achieve the same level of performance because your organisation's culture is different. You don't make motor cars, and your strategy might be quite different. Organisations can gain significant improvements by selecting parts of TPS and adapting these for their own workplace and business. Simply copying doesn't work. You must first consider the applicability of your partner's process and then adapt it to your own organisation. Unless you adapt it, you're not going to get the results that you expect. This is failing to assess applicability. So really all I've done the last few minutes is just given you a few of these failures that I have seen most commonly. And these will relate to formal benchmarking practice. Benchmarking is learning from the experience of others. It comes naturally to all of us. In formal benchmarking, it's what we do every day. And it's what we've been doing over the last 2.5 days at this Congress. I would encourage you to continue to do that. Thank you for your time today. Enjoy the rest of the conference.